Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our third and final parent education webinar in our series this month. My name is Gretchen Knob, and I am the Regional Director of the Epilepsy Association of Western and Central Pennsylvania, working out of our Camp Hill office. The Epilepsy Association provides programs and services to those living with and affected by epilepsy in 49 counties in the western and central part of the state. Our offices are located in Pittsburgh, Altoona, and Camp Hill. Please visit our website at www.eawcp.org to learn more about our organization or to reach out to us. I want to thank all of you for joining us at this evening's workshop. Tonight, we will be focusing on the importance of providing access to the general education curriculum to all students. I would now like to turn it over to my colleague, Greg McConnell, Regional Coordinator in our Altoona office, to review some housekeeping items and to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Gretchen. I copy what Gretchen said in welcoming you all here and thanking you for joining us. This time, it is our delight and our honor to welcome Lorie Brew and Tammi Morton from the PEAL, that's the Parents Education and Advocacy Leadership Center, as our presenters this evening. Lorie Brew works for the PEAL Center as the SPDG coordinator for the eastern area of the state. Much of Lorie's knowledge about disability-related issues comes from individuals with disabilities themselves, families who support someone with a disability, as well as her own personal experience of raising a child with autism. Lorie is dedicated to the principles of families to the max and supporting the statewide parent network. Tammi Morton is a graduate of Allegheny College. She has an MA in education where she focused on developing a curriculum for adults with intellectual disabilities. She began her career working with a variety of children as a therapeutic staff support, or TSS, for Northwestern Human Services. Tammi is a parent of a child who has a disability, and as an SPDG grant coordinator at the PEAL Center, Tammi hopes to instill the belief that every student has the capacity to learn. And with that, I'll turn it over to our speakers for this evening. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Greg and Gretchen. We're really happy to be here and welcome everybody. You'll see on the first slide here that we have course 2. We'll be talking about how the different courses that we usually give, they'll be at the end, and just give you a little bit of background about that. Of course, this is course 2, access to the general education curriculum across settings. Again, my name is Lorie Brew from the PEAL Center. For people that don't know the PEAL Center, we are the Parent Training and Information Center for Pennsylvania, all of Pennsylvania. I live in Philadelphia and work from the Philadelphia PEAL office. And my colleague can introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Tammi Morton, and I also work for the Parent Training and Information Center, the PEAL Center. Every state has one, and PEAL is the one for Pennsylvania, and I work out of the Pittsburgh office.
So we're a little bi-coastal on the state there.
Yeah.
You know, I just wanted to let you know, we also, one of the things that the PEAL Center does is really help families navigate special education. We have parent advisors on staff. So if tonight you have maybe some more questions that maybe we can't answer, and they may be even more personal questions that you want to talk to a parent advisor about, or somebody we also have on staff is family-to-family healthcare coordinator who can also talk to you about the medication and sort of how to make sure that the healthcare plans are what you want them to be for your student. So we'll make sure that you have that information, that contact information, so that you could always call, because it may not be right now, but it may be later. The other thing we're going to ask people to keep in mind is really think about the child from whom you're here tonight. Keeping that student in mind can really help maybe foster some things to think about as you go forward in maybe your IEP. Okay. So This course came about from an educational initiative of Project Max. And I don't know if people have heard of Project Max, but it was making sure that students, maybe with more complex needs, had access to the general education curriculum. All students. It was, we come from the perspective that we presume the competence of all children, of all students, and we foster high expectations. We don't teach to a diagnosis. We make sure that there is a rigorous and robust curriculum for a student. The adults in the room are the ones that have to do it. If we want to bring students up, it's the adults in the room that have to do that, make those changes. This collaboration is through the PEAL Center. You see our logo here on the side. It's also from Patton. You may have heard of Patton. They have amazing resources also for students. They are the right hand of special education. If you go to their website, you can look for resources. And we also work with HUNE, our Philadelphia organization, who reach out to families who are Spanish speaking. So if you know families that are Spanish speaking and that need some support in special education, reach out to us and we can make sure that that can happen. So this is our Families to the Max mission and vision. And again, it's the parents with the collaboration of teachers, educators, administrators, to make the difference, to bring those opportunities. We are very much about, no matter where your student is, no matter the placement of your student, they could be in an autistic support, a life skills class, it doesn't matter where the placement is, we want to make sure that they get access to the general education curriculum. So that's a real big principle tenet that we have for Families to the Max. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you can get affiliated, learn more about Families to the Max towards the end of this presentation, if you're interested. So tonight's session's goal is to familiarize families with the methods used to provide access to the general education curriculum and the importance of providing access for all students.
We are going to, over the next few slides, we're going to talk about what access to the general education curriculum is. How do we define it? We're going to look at the PA core standards, just glazing over, and then we're going to look at access to the general education curriculum for all and what that looks like as it's played out. Next slide. First, we're going to look at what curriculum is. How do we define curriculum? And if you look at these four terms, consider what you would consider curriculum to be. Is it textbooks, class schedule, or the overall plan for instruction? Is it the academic standards? How would you define it? A second. While textbooks, class schedule, and academic standards are all part of it, there's a lot of moving parts. We really are looking at the overall plan for instruction. And what I would like you to picture is framework. Consider framework for building a house. That one house may be different from another, but they both have the same basic framework in place. And consider concepts like scaffolding in education, but the overall plan for instruction or the framework for instruction. Okay. We're defining it in 1997, there's federal regulation and now more commonly referred to as Individuals with Disability Education Act. It's IDEA, and they define it. It's very simple. It's a lot of language here, but the term general curriculum is the same curriculum as that established for students without disabilities. So we're really looking at that framework, that the framework's the same. The houses may look different, but the framework is the same. Okay, and the PA core standards, they're rigorous, they're high quality, and if you remember, if we want to bring up the first bullet, if you remember what Lorie was talking about when she was going over the maximizing opportunities and our mission and vision, she used the word rigorous. And in the next bullet, we're going to see the word robust, that these are really raising expectations for our students and making sure that students get access or opportunities to learn what other students are learning. And we'll talk a little bit about how we find those standards in the next slide. Here is one of several different approaches, and you might be able to come up with ways of finding this information as well. This is the Standard Aligned System. It is a website. And whenever you click on the website, you will first see the latest news in education, especially in these times. They look at the continuity of education and compensatory education. But if you scroll down to the bottom of this site, you will see a circle and it will say curriculum framework. Again, the word framework. If you click on that, you'll see it again. And then you click on it a second time. And on that page, you'll see 4 terms. And I want to bring this to attention because it is important for why. We talk about why we're doing this, what the content is, and then we talk about how it's going to play out. And the first term is big ideas. So it's those overarching ideas. What do we want the students, what concepts do we want the students to walk away with? The second thing would be the knowledge that the students will have. What are they going to learn? What is the content? The third term is going to relate to competencies, and that is the skills that the students are going to develop in the process, all prioritized. And then finally, essential questions. And those questions link those big ideas, those big overarching concepts to day-to-day life. Why is this important for my student to learn? How is this going to help my student be successful post-graduation after they're done with school? And in this standard aligned system, you can select your student's grade, you can select the subject, if it's English, and then you can narrow it down even more, and then I'm drawing a blank, but the standard aligned system, the standards will appear there, and then you can sort it out through that if you're so inclined. There's other ways of finding the curriculum, but this is a very in-depth way of going about it.
So let's talk more about how we can access this curriculum. Tammi showed you one of the portals that you can do that. You can look and see what the standards are. But if you think about like where your student is, like where can you find the curriculum for the school district that your student is in? I mean, do you know where to get that? I'm just wondering if people can put that in the chat, like where would you look for that, the curriculum for your student? What are your students, maybe non-disabled peers? What are they learning? Where can you find that curriculum? Let me see. Anybody have any? Let me see. Okay. Never thought about it, but wondered. School website, that's a good one, school website. Sometimes you have to really look hard for it. I mean, if you go on a website, sometimes you have to look for it. And I'm going to say this, if you want it and you can't find it, you can ask your teacher that you would like a hard copy. So you can always ask for it. That's not a problem. Thanks. So what does access mean? Access requires that the student can actually receive and understand what is being offered. We've seen too many times from the PEAL Center, the kids are maybe in an inclusive setting, but they're not really included. And that just, you know, we've seen some bad stuff with that. But also we just want to make sure that all students have access. Again, not mattering, you know, it doesn't matter where the placement of the student is. And oftentimes we use like accommodations and modifications for that. I know we've used that, Tammi uses it for her daughter. And we really want to make sure that we think about, we're going to talk more about that, modifications and accommodations in a little bit in the future here. Let's see. So, okay, and now it won't let me go. Let me try it down here. There we go. So why do you think, again in the chat box, I'm wondering if you can put, why may it be important for your child to have access to the general education curriculum? Why might that be important to you? Just put it in the chat. I know Tammy's going to talk a little bit more about that. Here, to have the opportunity to get into regular classroom setting full-time instead of specialized classroom. So make sure they have the opportunity for that. Thanks, Tobin. Connection with peers. That's so important. Okay. Speech development. Great, great. Important. And sometimes, like Tammi was saying, just those big ideas, and you can't imagine all the stories that we hear about students being, you know, having access to the general ed, and things that they have learned that they have been able to convey to others have been amazing. Just, and I like that word that you said, that opportunity. It gives opportunity. And you don't know what they might like. I mean, it gives opportunity for, like even Tammi said, like, you know, after graduation. Thanks for that. Okay.
Go back one.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, we talked about why, and this last piece, hopefully you're picturing your student or your students, if you're an educator, why it's important, you know, that we want to build confidence, that we want them to be prepared for the world past graduation, and we want to give them every opportunity to demonstrate what they can do and what they do know in a variety of ways. We also talk about what, so the actual content, what access to the general education is. Now we're going to talk about how. How does this play out day to day in a classroom? And what strategies do we use? And the first strategy, and probably one of the most powerful strategies, is to put it in your student's IEP or your child's IEP. The individual education program, it's important to note that it's a program, it's not a plan, and it's not a document. It is a living, breathing program that can be adapted and changed with as little as a phone call. We do encourage people to have a general education teacher on the IEP team so that we can simply say, what are other students learning in the classroom? And we want to look at the students' measurable annual goals, you know, and those are based on the student's current level of functioning. But remember that scaffold, remember that framework, that the house still has these big ideas and the general core prioritized curriculum that their house might be built a little differently. And some of the things that might go in the brick and mortar of this house might be specially design instruction or modifications and accommodations. And you want to look in the students' annual goals, you want to look in the special education related services, supplementary aids and services, and program modifications. And these are all in the IEP. Another very powerful place to put things in the IEP, because it becomes part of that living document, is parental concerns. So if you're a parent and you say, I know that comprehension is a challenge for my child, how do we break down the barriers so that my child's able to read and comprehend what they read? Next slide. Okay. I love this slide. This looks at designing standard line instruction. The first column is all students, and by all, we mean all. So this includes students with disabilities. All of these questions are applicable to both sets. But we divvy out students with disabilities, we kind of look at the most important, the priorities, and what we're going to use to break down the barriers. So if you look at the questions, you know, what do all students need to know and be able to do? Those big ideas, you know, but what is most important to learn? Look at the next one is prioritizing and making sure that they get everything that they need. And when all of these things are in place, you have greater exposure to diverse subject matter. And that provides increased opportunities that the student, we may not realize that a student has an interest in something unless they are exposed to it. If they're not given the opportunity, they have no way of letting us know what their interests are or what they can do. So it really benefits the students' education beyond. And there's also the collaboration between the team and hopefully improved communication, because I can't stress enough how much better things go whenever you're able to clearly communicate your child's needs, wants, and skills to the educators, and really focusing on what the student can do, not so much on what the student can't do, because we're going to look at the environment to overcome barriers rather than changing the student.
So Tammi talked about supplementary aids and services. We also have some resources for you to look at for that as well. But when we look at that, there's services and aids that support a student in the general education curriculum, in the general education classrooms, or other education related settings. That means extracurricular, maybe they're in the band, or maybe in non-academic settings, maybe at the dance on Friday nights that the school district is having. So it can really, in educating, making sure that kids are educated with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent possible. And really, there's some examples when we talk about supplementary aids and services. When we think about the environment, sometimes the biggest thing that comes up is like a child, you know, the student's placement, where their chair is, maybe in the classroom, maybe on the bus. We think of the environmental parts, or staff support needs. I just, you know, maybe a behavior specialist is needed, or, you know, planning time. Tammi talks a lot about maybe that collaboration. You know, I know for myself, when I was in an IEP and the general ed teacher came in, and they would say, do you need to talk to her? I was like, no, I didn't even know why she was there. And this is years ago, but we know now that there should be a collaboration with the special ed teacher and the general ed teacher to collaborate on how they can make sure that the child has access to what their non-disabled peers are learning. It's very important, and I learned that that was an important thing to do. Planning time, again, equipment, making sure that there's some equipment, you know, computer, software, augmentative communication devices, things of that. Pairing of instruction, maybe it's the presentation of how the instruction is being, and like I know Tammy was saying, like that's scaffolding, and that may, you know, really be important, especially when you're talking about students that have some real medical issues as well. That's real important. Again, so look at the, you know, look at some of the resources that are provided to you that can really help give like a framework. There's one, it talks about, you know, how you can look at the collaborative side, the instruction, the physical, and the social and behavioral. So take a look at them. I think they're real. They can help you think about ways to make it work better for your students.
This is among my favorite concepts for education. It's universal design for learning. And UDL was born out of architecture. And the idea is if we build buildings with diverse needs in mind, we won't have to go back and remodel the building to accommodate. So if we build instruction, consider the framework and the house that we're building. If we build it with the students' needs in mind, doing it in a way that offers multiple ways of looking at the work and processing the work, and multiple ways of expressing how they understand the concepts, because some students may not be good spellers. So if they're taking a test and they're filling out answers to the question and they're losing points because they're not spelling things properly, is that really quite so important? So again, it's prioritizing and really looking at, you know, the structure. This also is built on the way that the brain works. So I think that this group here is probably interested in the brain and the mind, and it looks at 3 different areas, and some of this will sound familiar from what we were just talking about. There is a recognition network, and whenever we talk about the what, that is the content. There is the strategic network, that's how, and universal design is a how, it's a process. And then there's the affective network, which is kind of that why. It's the thing that's going to really engage the student and get their attention. Next slide. In UDL, how it plays out in the classroom is there's plenty of options. And the example that I can think of is my daughter, she has a great deal of difficulty reading, and she understands word by word, but it's really understanding the context and having it, once she looks up, is she able to say what she just read or explain what she just read? So if she's going into 10th grade and they're going to be doing Shakespeare, I'm not going to say, well, don't have her do it. Maybe just in recognizing that that's going to be a big cognitive load for her. Her reading Shakespeare is going to take a lot of mental energy. So we might break it down a little bit, you know, so that's a modification. The expectations become a little bit less. But we'll also offer it to her in plain modern language, which she might also struggle with. But then we'll have her watch the movie. We could have her act out a scene in the play. We could have her watch the play and talk about why people are using the inflection and tone. And we can really prioritize what concepts she needs to walk away with. She's a concrete thinker. How is she going to understand metaphors and similes and figurative language? So if we really pare it down to that, it becomes part of that scaffold. That's the big idea, because in real life, she's going to need to know that that's sarcasm, or that's a joke, or that one thing can mean something else. So that's in providing multiple examples, just like I just talked about there. Critical features, what do we really want her to walk away with? Multiple media and formats, and then the background context. And we talk about too that there's the zone of proximal development, which is along with scaffolding. It's a theory of education, but she may have things in her real life that relate to maybe Romeo and Juliet, where she might have had a crush, and how does that, so in real life she's learning things and she can apply it, and then that's going to kind of kick in that motivation piece of it. Next slide. And applying UDL in the classroom, again, I love the word opportunities. I love the word flexible, please, as far as flexibility and ongoing relevant feedback. And my first experience with the UDL approach in a classroom was before UDL was probably a thing. And it was in first grade. I was a TSS, and I worked with a little boy, first grader, and I was supposed to keep him on task. And this was my second year with him. And I was sitting right next to him. The teacher said, please, move away from him, because I was stigmatizing him, right? So all of the approaches we want to, and that's even in the SAS Toolkit, it's part of the Gaskins case from 2005. We don't want to stigmatize students or really make it obvious that they're getting extra support. So what this teacher asked me to do is explain what my purpose was. And I'm like, I'm supposed to keep him on task, and I'm supposed to give him his schedule. So I have to be right there because he needs his picture exchange communication system, PECS, and I give him his schedule so he knows what to expect. So the next day, she introduced me to the class as Ms. Tammi is the classroom helper. She's going to help everyone stay on task. She's going to show everyone our daily schedule. And the students went nuts for it. They loved these PECs and they wanted to see what was coming next. So instead of separating him and stigmatizing him and having us do our own little schedule, we did it for the entire classroom. And it was a hit. The students loved it. And it was in no time that I was faded from that classroom as a support, and he was able to follow through with the rest of the classroom. So that's a general concept of how UDL would probably play out. That what works for one student at a basic level will work for the entire classroom, that other students can benefit from those interventions.
Oh, assistive technology. So everybody, through IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education, require teams to look at assistive technology for every student that has an IEP. And sometimes when we think about assistive technology, we go right to like the big things, like maybe a communication device and stuff like that. But we really have to look at maybe even the smaller. Some of it could be low tech, it could be high tech. It could be Post-it notes. I know somebody who used to have the Post-it note for the next chapter in their book so they can go right to it, so they don't have to have trouble doing that. So it could be a very low tech. It can be large print for a student maybe who has some visual issues. It could be a pencil grip. And high tech, of course, it could be a digital recorder, computer, communication device. It also, when we talk about assistive technology, it's also a service. I mean, you have to have time to pick out a device that is that really, is perfect for the student, your child. Sometimes we hear families that say, "Oh, my son, needs this," and they say the brand name of something, but a lot of times we have found, through families, that they really have to look at the whole picture and see what really works. May not be the brand that they're thinking of. So that's a service. Selection, and I can't stress enough, even the maintenance of the device. We have found that, I know a case where they wiped off all the stuff that was on the computer. Who's in charge of the maintenance of that device? Specifically, backing up all that information that the student's been working on so that you're not losing things like that. And I also can't stress this enough, our Families to the Max, one of our biggest beliefs is that all students should know how to communicate, should be able to communicate. And we're not saying just wants and needs. I mean, that's a really good start, but making sure that students, maybe, we have this benchmark of maybe, students can say what they did last weekend. What did you do last weekend? And they would be able to relay that. So there's some benchmarks in that, and we really feel very strongly about it. So accommodations versus modifications. I bet everybody knows a lot about this, but we have to go through it because I think it's important that you can't have enough about this. Accommodations are leveling the playing field for a student. Maybe a student needs the information by Braille or, by visual, by video, but they have to know the same amount of information. They need to know what all the other students have to do and what's expected of them. It doesn't change the learning goal, especially when we're talking about the general education curriculum. So modifications, it may change the learning goal. Maybe, the student only has to know like maybe 3 of the 10 spelling words or something like that. Or maybe reduces the academic expectations. Again, like Tammi going back to that big idea, and she's, maybe talking about Shakespeare, we know that Romeo and Juliet, that's a book that everybody a lot of times has to read, but maybe the student, it could be, a smaller version with the big ideas, that they have to do. So again, here are some accommodations. Preferential seating, extended time assignments, that's a big one. Read aloud, we know from Project Max, we found that teachers were beginning to, like if a student couldn't write, there's a microscope and all the students have to learn, what the parts of the microscope are, and a teacher maybe take a student out and just point to what the pieces are, and the student was able to verbally tell the teacher what it was. So different ways that they are assessed is really important. And some modifications, a reduction of homework, curriculum, and reducing the complexity of the work, and again, grading based on work completion. That may have happened a lot now, I think, with some of the, what we've been going on with, COVID and virtual learning. I'm wondering if people can put in the chat box any accommodations and modifications that they can share that they have for their own students. See. Okay. Okay. Any modifications or accommodations that your student has on, maybe on an IEP? Extra time for test. Oh, a slant board. Gotcha. Terrific. Terrific. Sometimes my clicker doesn't want to work. So that's our presentation in a nutshell. You may have some questions and we can talk more about that, you know, if you have any questions, but this is the 5 courses that we do for Families to the Max. The first one we do is Presuming Competence, one of our first tenets of, you know, fostering high expectations. Our second one is Access to the General Curriculum across settings. Third is Maximizing Communication and Learning for your child. The fourth one is a big one that we get a request for, is collaboration on school teams in ways that make a difference, because that can be a challenge. And the fifth one is Leading Change. And our Leading Change is really what's so great about this educational initiative is that we have parents on board, because you can't make any changes without parents. And we know that very clearly. And this is, if you want to know more about Families to the Max, this is not the website, the email, f2max@patent.net. And you're welcome. If you have any other questions outside of, you know, what we're going to answer tonight, you can go to the PEAL Center, our phone number. We're all working from home, or patent, or you can even call if you have a Spanish family that needs some more information.
Okay, thank you, Lorie and Tammi. There were some questions that came in the chat, and I know I saw, Tammi, you addressed a couple of those. I'm going to read down through them and see if you want to add anything to those questions in addition to what you typed in there. I'll start with a question from Jana. I'll read right through it. My daughter was diagnosed right before the quarantine. I'm not sure what, if she has any educational needs. What is the best way to monitor or discover needs she may have? We'll let you answer that first, and then I'll read the second part.
I would begin with an evaluation, request an evaluation from the school. I would call PEAL and get some input from a parent advisor, because they would be able to advise you far better than I could on this. But if she just received a diagnosis, we may want you to look into that and how that plays out for her in the classroom.
I think the other thing is too, you know, so you can go there on PEAL website. We do have some webinars that talk about, you know, progress, like monitoring your child too. So, you know, that might be, there's ways to do that. So you can look at that webinar and check that out as well.
Thank you. The second part to that question from Jana comes in. Medication seems to be working, but we are so early in this, we don't really know. How do I communicate to the team of teachers moving to the middle school to be on the lookout for any accommodations my daughter may need?
That's a good one, I think. If there's any medication issues, I would actually reach out to the PEAL, the family-to-family healthcare coordinator. She's really good on those independent, you know, healthcare plans. She can really direct you. And I think the accommodations, I think looking at the child and making sure that whatever the need is, to make sure that they have access, is important. And, you know, if you're not sure, one of the biggest things you can do is, while you're in like a meeting, you can say, okay, let's brainstorm. How can we do this? So ask that question and make the team brainstorm what can be done. What are some accommodations? And really, the sky's the limit.
And the key word here in your question is communicate. I can't stress enough how important it is to just tell the teachers where you're at, what's going on, and what to look for. And then that builds an awareness, and they may have, you know, answers to your questions. And educators are really hungry for parents to reach out and communicate with them.
And you're an integral part of the team. That's the other thing that we stress. You are the most important part of the team. And I would make sure that no one makes you feel any different.
And if you noticed anything when you were doing school at home, document all of that, because that's part of, so if you collect data on how your child was working, that maybe there's a dip after she has lunch or he has lunch, you know, that is all things that the school may benefit from knowing.
Thank you very much. Next question is, how is UDL implemented in online learning?
And I sent a link to understood.org. I'm going to also type in cast.org. CAST is really a hub for UDL, and it explains how it works. This article on understood.org talks about specific strategies for doing distance learning and making sure that things are still, you know, on the computer and off the computer, and really engaging the student in a variety of ways, which is far more challenging from distance learning. But it seems like a pretty good resource to start with.
And I wanted to say one other thing about Patton. They do have educational consultants on staff that they have office hours, and you can call them specifically with questions about how to engage a student maybe that they're having trouble with, you know, engaging because of the virtual learning. They can, again, brainstorm ideas with you.
Thank you. I see a question came in from Tobin regarding where you can access the SAS materials, and that website was put up by Tammi. I don't know if Tammi or Lorie, you want to mention anything else about that one?
We also have it in the PDF and in the series of PDFs. Oh yeah, I definitely download that one, and download the ABCs of learning, because it has all of those little initialations and acronyms. And I still use it. How many years in education I've been in, that sometimes, wait, what's the LEA versus the GRE, you know? So those are two really good resources. And also more details about the SAS Toolkit is on the Patton website.
Patton website. Mm-hmm.
Great.
And I'm going to say the Patton website is a little clunky right now to navigate, but just stay with it. I know it's going through some transformations.
Okay. This one actually comes from me. What new learning issues have surfaced for children and youth with learning disabilities as a result of schools moving their teaching online following COVID-19? Any patterns you're seeing?
Well, actually, interestingly, there are some families that have said that they really like, if you have a child with a disability, that they've been very, they like being at home and doing it by the computer. There's a lot of less anxiety. I also we heard from a parent that felt that her student was right away, he was in special education, and because of the special education, teachers do a lot with virtual or communication device. They're pretty tech savvy, and they have that, and I'm not saying all teachers don't have that, but she said right away, her student was learning right away, and her student that was in the general education classroom lagging. So I thought that was interesting.
Absolutely.
And what we're seeing, I have a neurotypical 12-year-old, and I have a 15-year-old who's autistic. And Aubrey's teachers were all, my autistic daughter's teachers were all in line, and everything was the same, and she knew where to access everything, and didn't have the social anxiety that she normally does. She was able to attend better at first. Then it got to a point where she wasn't getting instruction that she needed, because whenever they were doing kind of the revamp of everything that she had already learned, I discovered that she knows more about algebra than I do, so I couldn't help her. So we actually had to get somebody else to help her understand the concept. So that's where the gap was that she's missing those instructional pieces, because I'm just a facilitator, I'm not the instructor. So that's been a bottoming out, but you know, we made it through. With the general ed teachers, my 12-year-old was like, well, one teacher has the assignment here and another one has it here, and then the other one has it in an email. So they were all disjointed and doing things differently, whereas the special education teachers are used to collaboration, working together, and everything was well organized. So it would really benefit general education teachers to get with special education teachers on how to streamline things in a consistent manner. That's what we're seeing.
Great. Those are excellent points. Thank you both so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Gretchen for some closing remarks. Gretchen?
Thank you, Greg. I would like to thank our wonderful speakers, Tammi and Lorie, for sharing their expertise with us all this evening. The high number of people enrolling in this parent workshop series is a testament to the fact that the people we serve are seeking more information about these topics surrounding the issues that you face in your lives. We are extremely thankful for your participation and hope that you will be able to put into action some of the knowledge gained from the webinars in this series. But thank you all again, and I hope you all continue to stay safe and healthy.